Richard never planned to stay the night. Javier's casual invite felt harmless, a favor between friends. But the storm rose, the power fell, and silence swallowed the apartment. One careless touch lingered. A laugh shook. Breath met breath. By morning, nothing would be simple or safely unspoken for them both. The storm had been flirting with the city all afternoon, blowing skirts of rain under awnings and knotting traffic into tight, impatient clumps. By the time I left the office, the sky had lowered itself like a bruised shoulder over the rooftops, and the forecast turned prophetic. Javier texted as I stood under the revolving door's shallow shelter, watching the crosswalk lights blink uselessly through the downpour. "You'll never make it home," he wrote. "Come to mine. I'll order takeout and you can crash. We can pretend we're students again, broke and invincible." I typed back that I was fine, that the subway still ran. Thunder replied to my lie by rattling the steel ribs of the building. A second later, the sky cracked open, and everyone in the vestibule stepped backward in a little dance of shared surrender. "All right," I sent. "You win." 10 minutes later, I was in a cab that hydroplaned through rivers that used to be streets. The driver, a silent philosopher with 2 pine-scented trees dangling from his mirror, dropped me outside Javier's building and wished me luck with a thumbs up. Javier opened the door before I could knock, wearing a threadbare t-shirt and that grin that always arrived before he did, as if his smile cleared space for the rest of him. He smelled like laundry detergent and cumin, and behind him the apartment glowed amber and generous. "Richard, you're drenched," he said, hand lifting toward my shoulder and hesitating. "I've got towels, also a questionable bottle of Rioja that wants forgiveness." I stepped inside, the damp city falling away. The door shut with a soft seal, a submarine closing against a dark sea, and we exhaled together. I'd known Javier since our freshman year, when he'd sketched the professor's nose in charcoal while I tried to memorize the periodic table. He was supposed to be a civil engineer. I was supposed to be a doctor. Instead, he designed water systems, and I translated other people's feelings into branding. Some truths we'd never said out loud lived between us like good furniture, solid, comfortable, taken for granted. Chief among them, Javier was straight, and I was not. It had remained a non-issue because I'd insisted it was, because I was good at lifting heavy things and calling them light. He handed me a towel and turned back to the kitchen, where a pot simmered quietly, perfume of garlic and tomatoes slipping around the room like a promise. Rain hammered the windows so hard the glass seemed to vibrate. Thunder folded somewhere close, the whole building listening with us. "You cooked?" I asked, dragging the towel over my hair. I was emotionally prepared for soggy fries. He laughed, the real kind that made his eyes fold at the corners. "Emergency pasta," he said. "My grandmother's cure for storms and heartbreak. You're getting the deluxe edition, with basil." We ate at the counter, steam fogging our faces, the bottle of wine surrendering in generous pours. The power flickered once, twice, like a heartbeat trying to decide, then steadied again. We pretended we hadn't both held our breath. Outside, the storm insisted on itself, relentless as a grievance. "So," Javier said, picking at a knot in the wooden countertop, "tell me why you looked like you were running from something when you texted me at 3. I twirled my fork. "Client drama," I said. "A rebrand that's really a divorce with nicer fonts. I took it personally. I always do." His mouth softened. "I hate that for you." That was Javier. Practical tenderness. He would hand you a tool and a compliment in the same breath. It was part of why people fell in love with him wherever he went, and part of why I had promised myself I wouldn't. We washed dishes with music low and the evening settling. He bumped me with his hip when I tried to monopolize the sponge, and I flicked water at him in retaliation. He yelped and chased me with damp hands, catching my wrist just as the apartment sighed and went completely black. We froze. Outside, the storm roared louder, now that it didn't have to fight the lights. Somewhere in the building, someone cursed. Someone else cheered, and the city became 19th century again, averaging out to candlelight and patience. Javier let go of my wrist as if it had burned him. "I'll find candles," he said into the dark, voice near my ear. The apartment had rearranged without sight. Furniture became suggestion. When he moved away, the space cooled by a fraction, and I realized how close we had been standing. I pressed my palm where his fingers had circled. He returned with a cluster of squat candles and a box of matches. Sparks popped, then gentle fire unspooled, revealing his face in little sculptures of light and shadow. The room shrank to a ring of warm islands. He set one candle between us on the counter and looked at me. "You okay?" he asked, candlelit and sincere. I nodded. "You?" He smiled like a confession. "I like storms," he said softly. "They make me feel like the world is telling the truth for once. No pretending, just wind saying, 'I'm here.' Rain saying, 'Me too.'" He shrugged, abashed by poetry. Lightning leaked around the curtains, and for a second, the room became a photograph of itself. In that flash, he was all angles and warmth, and my heart, treacherous and earnest, moved toward him the way rivers find the sea, regardless of obstacles, each bend another decision already made. "You can take my bed," Javier said. "I'll do the couch. It's not a sacrifice. I was planning to fall asleep there with a documentary anyway." I rolled my eyes. "I'll take the couch," I said. My spine likes short-term martyrdom. He smirked. "We could flip a coin. Power's out." "Take the bed," he said finally. "Please." I nodded, and something unnamed followed me down the hall slowly. I told myself it was the storm keeping me awake, not the way Javier's voice kept finding me in the dark. A couch, a bed, a secret. One small cut, one careful touch, and all the names we'd used for ourselves suddenly felt insufficient, treacherous, almost new to us both. Javier's bedroom always surprised me. I'd imagined it in passing, messy, a painter's palette of clothes and cables. Instead, it was quiet and intentional. A plant thriving on the sill, a shelf of books arranged by feeling instead of author, photos clipped to twine with tiny wooden pins. In one, his mother stood in a sunlit kitchen, laughing. In another, the two of us at 20, cheeks blown out as we extinguished a cake with too many candles. He'd written underneath in his tiny, precise handwriting, "Try not to panic." The bed was made, tucked corners like a hotel, and the sheets smelled faintly of cedar. He'd laid out a t-shirt and soft shorts for me, the kind of preparation that looks like thoughtfulness, but is really attention. The shirt was big enough to make me smaller, and when I pulled it on, it carried his laundry soap and something like him, something warm and a little peppery, as if light could have a scent. I got under the sheets. The ceiling was a calm raft above, me, the candle he'd left on the dresser, steadying the room to a small, brave glow. Thunder rolled and unrolled, sheets of it flapped across the skyline. I tried to listen to rain the way Javier did, as honesty, as a kind of prayer. But my brain caught on details, the line of his wrist against the matchbox, the way he'd smiled when the lights had surrendered, the quick release when our skins separated. The house held the storm's fist and did not falter. Sleep pretended it was coming and then went somewhere else. I slid out of bed, took the candle, and padded down the hall. The apartment had been trimmed to an outline, the kind that makes you step carefully, as if the dark might get offended. Javier was on the couch, knees drawn up, a blanket around his shoulders and a candle's lake of light on the coffee table. He'd switched from wine to tea. The steam rose and then vanished. He smiled when he saw me, a smile that clarified everything and nothing at once. "Bed too quiet?" he asked. "Your sheets are straight A students," I said. "I'm more of a curriculum problem." He laughed softly and patted the cushion beside him. I sat, the couch giving with a familiar sigh. For a while, we just listened to weather and the occasional far-off siren, the city's heartbeat adjusting. He tipped his mug to me. "Mint," he said, and passed it. I sipped and closed. My eyes. A thing can be small and still be kindness. "Do you remember," he began, "senior year? The power outage on campus. We sat in the stairwell because it was cooler there, and we read from that awful anthology by phone light. You did voices for every poem, I said. The sonnet that sounded like a disappointed grandfather. The villanelle that wanted to be a pop song, he grinned. The candle turned the grin into something lit from the inside. You cried at the one about the harbor, he said, gentle. I was hung over, I said, and he shook his head like a metronome of disbelief. A gust shouldered the window, and a seam somewhere in the old frame surrendered a thread. A slender leak announced itself with a cold drop on the back of my hand. Shit, Javier said, springing up. He dragged a stack of old towels from the linen closet like a magician with scarves, and together we pressed them along the sill, hands side by side, the cold creeping through the fabric. Another drop hit the floor behind us. Where? I began, and then I stepped backward and the arch of my foot found something sharp. A shard of glass, born from some careless earlier moment, woke itself to the sound of my breath. I jerked up, swore, then laughed because it felt absurd to be injured by the night. You okay? Javier was already kneeling, the blanket falling from his shoulders to reveal the pale line where his collarbone met the curve of his neck. He guided me to the couch, calm and competent. Don't move, he said, and disappeared into the bathroom to return with the first aid kit he had labeled Dog Plus Disaster because he knew who he was. He crouched in front of me and took my foot into his hand. The intimacy of it, unexpected, unarguable, sent a clean, bright shock up my leg. He tipped the candle closer with his free hand, its flame making a little boat of my ankle. There, he said, and plucked the sliver with tweezers. A pearl of blood welled, absurdly perfect. He dabbed it with gauze, gentle as weather on a lake. You have a bedside manner, I said to say something. I have a you stepped on glass in my apartment manner, he replied, not looking up. His fingers were warm, the pads slightly calloused. He wrapped a bandage around me like he was making a promise, and then rested his hand for a second longer than necessary. When he looked up, the room changed shape. Thank you, I said, because gratitude is sometimes the raft you're offered and you take it. He nodded and sat back on his heels, as if he'd been further away than that this whole time. The blanket was at my side. I pulled it over both our knees without thinking. He didn't flinch. The leak, temporarily appeased by towels, slowed to an occasional reprimand. You ever feel, he said after a while, voice low, like you're good at building the bridge and terrible at crossing it? I build bridges for a living, I said, and he smiled, brief and reflexive. Pipelines, technically. You know what I mean. He stared at the candle. I'm good at plans, work, friends. I'm good at being what people need. But sometimes I look at my life and it feels like a well-organized waiting room. And you're waiting for, I asked, even though my heart had already sketched an answer and crossed it out. Something I've told myself I don't want, he said. Or something I don't have words for yet. He swallowed. The thunder rolled a little farther away, as if it had found other business. I could have made it easy for both of us. I could have joked, moved the conversation toward safe islands. I stared at my bandaged foot, and then back at him. The couch narrowed, or we widened. Javier, I said, and it felt like a beginning I'd been avoiding. He looked at me then, and we weren't in college or at work or at any of the tiny ceremonies of our friendship. We were just two people on a couch with our knees under a blanket and a storm doing honest work around us. I don't want to make you a question you feel obligated to answer, he said, and the care in the sentence almost undid me. But I also... He stopped, and the silence between us contracted like a held breath. Then he laughed, shaky. Maybe this is the Rioja doing ambition. You're not drunk, I said, and I'm not either. Then take this as sober curiosity, he said. Did you ever... He exhaled. Did you ever think about us being different? The world arranged itself with startling obedience to a sentence. The candle whispered. Somewhere in the stairwell, a neighbor called hello to someone else. Ordinary life still having its say. I closed my eyes because sometimes vision is too loud. Yes, I said. I did. I do. When I opened them, his face had changed in the way a landscape changes when a cloud moves. Same features, new truth. He nodded slowly, as if translating. Okay, he said. Okay. We sat in that, not fixing it, not making it bigger or smaller. My foot pulsed in time with my heart. He lifted his hand, hesitated, and then put it on the blanket near my knee, not touching me, but there. It felt like the space between a match and a candle, possibility humming. The lights flickered on for an indignant half-second, refrigerator groaning awake, the microwave blinking 12 seconds, then snapped back off. We both laughed, too loud, startled. By the world's emphasis, the knock at the door came a second later. Javi? Mrs. Epstein from 4B, her accent as reliable as rent due. You boys okay? I have extra battery candles. He stood, glanced at me, a question he answered himself by touching my shoulder, and went to open the door. They murmured reassurances in the hall. He accepted a mismatched candelabra that looked like it had opinions and promised to check on her in the morning. When he came back, he leaned his head against the door briefly, the way you lean against a decision. The couch is getting dripped on, he said. It was true. A dark circle had begun to stamp itself onto the cushion's corner. He looked at me, open and exhausted. The bed, share, I said. The word slipped out, simple as a sigh. My pulse ordered an evacuation. My face stayed. He nodded, slow, and didn't make it strange. He lifted the candelabra like an absurdly elegant lighthouse, and we walked down the hall. In the bedroom, the bed looked like a neutral party, available to any argument. We slid under the same sheet, our shoulder blades careful strangers. The candle's light trembled, and then steadied. I don't know what any of this is, Javier said to the ceiling, and I could hear his smile and his fear wrestling. I just know I didn't want you on a wet couch. I know that's not all you know, I said, kind but not cornering. He laughed once. It turned into a breath. We didn't reach for each other. We didn't perform. We lay there, and the honest weather kept telling the truth outside. After a while, the part of me that was hand decided its own small revolution. I slid my fingers across the sheet until they met his. He turned his hand palm up, surprised and unsurprised, and we folded them together. The room shifted then, a tiny decree. It wasn't fireworks, it was yes. If there were names for what moved between our skin, they were whispered, syllables we'd learn later, when morning failed to be neutral. We slept like that, barely, waiting not for thunder, but for whatever we'd promised without saying it. Morning peeled the storm from the city, but not from us. Our hands were still threaded when the knock came, casual, ordinary, treacherous. A decision waited between breath and language, almost audible. Was last night a weather trick or a truth? One answer would change everything. The other, pretend nothing had. I woke to the softest brightness, gray light rinsing the ceiling, the kind that makes you speak quietly without knowing why. Rain had thinned to a hush. The candle on the dresser was a slumped island, a little lake of wax hardened mid-tide. Somewhere far off, a siren stitched the morning together. Javier's hand was still in mine. It felt like a solved equation, like a bridge already crossed while I slept. We lay on our backs, shoulders a respectful distance, fingers lock and key. The room smelled like wet city and cedar, and something else that didn't have a name yet. I looked toward him. He was awake, eyes tracing the ceiling's hairline cracks, as if they were a map. Hi, he said, voice rough with sleep. Hi. We didn't move. That felt important, as if any abrupt gesture might startle the moment into flight. My foot reminded me of its small wound with a polite throb. Before I could say anything else, someone knocked on the door. 3 brisk taps, the world announcing it still existed. We blinked at the ceiling like co-conspirators and then disentangled. Javier sat up, scrubbed his face with his palms, and gave me a look that said later, "Please." I nodded. He pulled on a hoodie, and I followed him down the hall, suddenly aware of how his t-shirt looked on me, how morning is a mirror you can't avoid. He opened the door to Mr. Patel, the building superintendent, a ladder under one arm and a sympathetic grimace under his mustache. "Roof leak," he said. Third floor took a bath. I'm checking damage lines. You two okay? His eyes flicked toward the towels nestling the window. We're okay, Javier said, stepping aside. Come in. Mr. Patel clucked at the sill like a doctor diagnosing a stubborn cold. He asked questions, took notes, set down the ladder, and promised a roofer by lunchtime. Javier answered. I hovered with my bandaged foot hidden by the rug, feeling like a secret written in the margins of the day. When Mr. Patel left, the apartment exhaled. We stood in the doorway a moment longer, looking at each other as if the next decision might be lurking near the hinges. Javier shut the door, leaned his forehead against it for a heartbeat, and turned back to me with a wince of a smile. Coffee? He asked, the most generous kind of detour. Always. The power clicked back on as if it had simply needed to gather its courage. Lights blinked into shy focus. The fridge hummed its relief. Javier's kitchen came back to itself. Bright tile, the polite line of mugs. He moved easily, setting water to boil, opening windows to let the damp leave in stages. I sat at the counter, watched steam rise like a plan. We assembled breakfast like people who had done this before. He tended the eggs, I toasted bread, we negotiated butter with the solemnity of diplomats. Normalcy is sometimes a brilliant disguise, and sometimes it's the way forward. When we finally sat down to eat, the first bite was absurdly good, like a password spoken and accepted. I could have let it slide. We could have let the day erase the night, blame the storm and the wine and the soft tyranny of proximity. But my chest felt too full of unsaid things, and his eyes kept returning to me as if drawn by a tide. I set my fork down. Javier, he looked up, and that was the moment that decided everything. He didn't flinch. Yeah, I like you, I said, and the sentence was both a parachute and a cliff. He exhaled a laugh that trembled. I know. He reached across the table, then stopped halfway, hand hovering, as if touching air might change it. I like you too. I don't have better words yet than that, and I don't want worse ones. I nodded, relief and fear taking turns. I need you to hear this. I can't be a hypothesis. I can't be the way you figure yourself out and then file me under a lesson. I know, he said again, quiet and quick. I wouldn't do that to you. He rubbed his thumb against the seam of his mug. I've been lazy with the truth, maybe, or practical. It was easier to be one thing and not look too closely. I liked girls. I dated them. I told myself that was the whole story because it was enough to keep moving. But it's not the whole story. Not if I'm honest. Not if I look at you and remember how something in me leaned toward you even when I didn't allow it. He lifted his eyes and held mine. Last night wasn't a storm trick. The storm just made the room small enough to hear what was already there. It was the most precise tenderness he'd ever spoken. I felt something unknit and reweave in me. I smiled, then winced, because the next part wasn't easy. If we try this, I need us to try it. Not just inside this apartment. I don't mean we make announcements or print t-shirts, but I can't be a closed room you visit and pretend is air. I don't want that either. He swallowed, nodded. I'm not ready to call myself anything this morning, but I'm ready to call you what you are to me. I'm ready to not pretend and... He smiled, small and crooked. I'm terrified. You're allowed to know that. I am too, I said. Terror seems like a fair entrance fee. His phone buzzed on the counter, a small, insistent insect. He glanced at it, reflexive. A text from Maya, his last almost relationship that had ended in a polite mutual shrug months ago, asking if he was okay after the blackout, inviting him to brunch later with the old crew. I watched his face arrange itself and then rearrange. He slid the phone face down. I'll answer later, he said, sounding like a person choosing a road on purpose. Right now I want to be here. Okay, I said, and the okay felt like a door opening. He stood, came around the counter, and stopped in front of me. The kitchen had the bright earnestness of morning after light. He tucked his hands into his sleeves as if to keep from rushing. May I? He asked, the question so simple it made my breath skip. Yes, I said. He leaned in slowly, giving me a dozen chances to withdraw I did not take. When his mouth touched mine, it felt like rain finding a place it already knew, like the quiet. After a long apology, the kiss wasn't dramatic, it was exact. It answered a question we'd been asking in different languages for years. We let the moment be small and therefore huge. When we separated, the world had not shattered or transformed. The eggs had cooled slightly. The sink still needed attention. But inside me, something stopped bracing for impact. A soft knock interrupted us again, a tap that sounded like good news clearing its throat. Mrs. Epstein, haloed by her coat's errant feathers, stood with a Tupperware of Rugelach and the satisfied look of a woman who suspected things. "Checking on my boys," she said, peering past Javier's shoulder. "Power's back. I brought sugar for your tea because happiness needs help." She clocked the kitchen, the plates, the morning faces. Her eyes warmed. "You look well," she declared, and then conspiratorial. "Roofmen are on their way, so if you have any, how do the kids say, private conversations, make them today?" "We'll, keep that in mind," Javier said, pink in a way I'd never seen on him. She pressed the Tupperware into my hands and patted my cheek. "Eat first, decide bravely later." Then she left in a rustle of maternal weather. We laughed, relief becoming air. The day stretched before us, ordinary as a timetable and yet charged. We washed dishes shoulder to shoulder, our movements learning a new choreography. I changed my bandage and let him tie the knot, methodical and a little proud. He looked at my foot like a cartographer looks at a coastline they've just mapped. Around noon, we carried 2 coffees down to 4B. Mrs. Epstein declared them acceptable, then shooed us away to go be young. The building smelled like wet concrete and lemon, cleaner. On the stoop, the city glittered in that post-storm confession, everything rinsed and too bright. We sat there like we had in other phases of our lives, exams, layoffs, the day his father went in for surgery. This time, the space between our shoulders meant 100 new things. "I don't know what to call myself," he said after a while, watching a dog tug its owner toward a puddle. "When I try, my head fills with other people's arguments. But when I look at you, I don't need a word yet. I just need to not lie." "We can be accurate later," I said. "Honest first." He nodded, let out a breath that rearranged the morning. "I want to see what this is. I want to take you to dinner somewhere that isn't our kitchen. Buy you flowers that aren't ironic. Ask you about your day like I deserve the answer." "You do," I said, startled by how easy it was to believe. "Will you?" He stopped, corrected. "Can we try? With patience, with room to be clumsy, but real." "Yes," I said, "with one condition." "Name it." "If you ever feel yourself pulling away because you're afraid of what people will think, you tell me before you act. And if you need to slow down, we slow down together. I don't want to find out from a shadow." He nodded, solemn. "Deal." We stayed on the stoop until the roofer's truck growled up and practical life reclaimed the building. Back upstairs, the apartment looked like itself and something else. Same furniture, new gravity. I packed my bag in the afternoon's long light, the t-shirt he'd lent me folded and then unfolded as if it might keep his shape. At the door, we hesitated in the way newness requires. He touched my jaw with the back of his fingers, a gesture so careful it set my throat on fire. "Text me when you get home," he said. "Text me before that." "I'm not far," I said, even though miles had nothing to do with it now. "I know." He smiled. Still. In the hall, the old elevator complained us downward. On the sidewalk, we stood for a second, 2 men with reusable mugs and the kind of knowledge you don't get to unlearn. He kissed me again, fast like a signature. Then we laughed, because nerves need exits, and parted in the way people do when later isn't a gamble anymore. On the train, the city's damp breath in my hair, I typed and erased 3 different messages, then sent the simplest. "I'm glad." The power went out. 3 dots, then his answer. "Me too. Come over tonight? We can plan a dinner that burns." Or doesn't. Either outcome has its charms. I looked up and saw our reflections in the dark window. Two faces I recognized, rearranged by honesty. My straight friend had asked me to stay the night, and then, well, we didn't stay who we were. We stayed, period. And the storm, generous and loud, could take only partial credit for that.